Let's bring in our panel now, Simon Banks and Peter McGauran. Gentlemen, it has been a difficult few days for the nation and certainly shocking for the Jewish community, particularly Peter McGauran. This remains an issue at the centre of the political discussion as well, as Peter McGauran, James Patterson and others have said the government have not responded forcefully enough.
True, Kieran. Distressing report by Shari, and an unspeakable act of violence against the Jewish community. But the whole situation's been worsened by the responses since the bombing on early Saturday morning. The Prime Minister took almost 36 hours to express a personal opinion that it was a terrorist act. The Victorian Premier still has not, to the best of my knowledge, or if she has, it's only today. And the police forces, the Federal Police and Victoria Police, haven't covered themselves in glory and look like complete plotters. Of course it's an act of terrorism. It's either radical Islamists or right-wing Nazis. Just because we don't know the identity yet, at least, of the attackers doesn't mean that the result and the purpose of the attack is terrorism. It's shameful that Australia has to wait 72 hours before it's confirmation that an attack on our fellow Australians is an act of terrorism.
The news conference with the AFP and Vic Poll, we're advised, will be at 12:30 p.m. Simon Banks and many hoping that will see the confirmation, the formal confirmation and declaration of this as a terrorist act. One way or the other, there will be more resources put into whether it's a joint counter-terrorism team or whatever else associated with the investigation. They will, you'd imagine, be throwing everything at this investigation.
Absolutely. And I know that some people have been saying that the government should have declared this sooner. I think what the government actually needed to do was to try and understand what actually happened here. Who were the perpetrators? What was the cause of it? Because if you don't actually define what the cause of the problem is, the solutions you may propose, as well-intentioned as they could be, may not be the best and most appropriate responses that you can give. That's the important thing, and that's why we leave this declaration quite specifically to our national security agencies to make this call when they're in the best and earliest possible position to do it. I hope we're going to get that advice at 12:30 because it means that our law enforcement agencies have got some semblance of understanding what was the motivation here, who might have actually committed this really horrendous crime that has no doubt terrified the Jewish community right around the country.
Yes, indeed. And Simon, when you look at the polling, and I don't like to go straight from such a serious issue to polling, but it's the perception of the leadership is really what I'm getting to here. Because Peter Dutton is seen as the strong leader, and the news poll today, Mr Albanese's rating is the lowest in decades when it comes to that particular rating. Is that a concern? Or should it be a concern to Labor?
Well, it's on a par with what John Howard had at some points during his career, Kieran. That's what the polling shows today. What it actually shows is that the government's popularity has actually risen slightly. That's what actually it shows. It shows that for the last 12 months, we've essentially been in this situation of around about 50-50 polling between the two major parties. That's what it actually shows. So look, we're going to have a big choice they're going to make in the first 6 months of next year about who's in the best place to govern the country in the next 3 years forward. We're going to hear from Peter Dutton during the course of this week about his plan to put up electricity prices for every single Australian to help drive manufacturing out of this country. I look forward to that discussion kicking off whenever Peter Dutton's ready.
Peter McGauran, you were a member of a government that was behind on many occasions before elections. You remember that, I'm sure, very well, in the Howard government. But Mr Howard was able to have a good campaign and bring it back and win the vast majority of those. Being it's 50-50, does the coalition need to get a bit more momentum heading into 2025?
Oh, definitely, Kieran, but tailwinds seem to be in their sails. And remember, the Resolve poll came out today that has the coalition 51 on a two-party preferred basis to 49, and the Freshwater poll has always had the coalition just over 50%. But leaving aside the two-party preferred polling, because I agree, wholeheartedly. It's too close to call. John Howard never had personal ratings of this kind, that where Anthony Albanese is the weakest Prime Minister since that category of characteristic started being polled in the Kevin Rudd time. And that's the whole problem for him, that he's seen as weak, Dutton's seen as strong, Albanese's seen weak on economic management, Dutton's seen as strong, and they're key issues. Now, the holy grail in politics is to frame your opponent, and in government we spend a lot of time and effort framing Kim Beazley, no ticker, Simon Crean, Union's lapdog, Mark Latham, inexperienced, although we ramped that up to erratic. Eventually, it's very hard to frame your opponent, and it's a good opposition because they're united and they've got a strong, capable leader, but they're not that good. Albanese has framed himself as weak. That's the most disturbing and worrying thing for the Labor Party, that Albanese has put himself in exactly this position, not so much the coalition. They're taking advantage of it now, and weakness is in every second attack they launch. But Labor has to be very worried about the competence of the Prime Minister.
Peter McGauran, Simon Banks, gentlemen, great to see you. We'll catch you next week.